All right, we're back. It is COMP1006 in the winter 2017 semester. It's week 2, part 2 of our broadcast. We have about half an hour or so left, 25 minutes, let's say. And what we want to talk about a little bit, if we can, is some of the PowerPoint that I put up. Let's take a look. And it kind of goes over some of the same things, but I want to talk theory a little bit. I know people don't like theory, but it's required because we're going to be tested on it a little bit. Remember that any test that I do in class, any quizzes or anything like that that are not scheduled for an exam, there's only 2 tests officially, one in week 7 and another one at week 14, right? Any other quizzes or stuff like that that we're going to be doing in class are going to be bonus, right? So if I do a pop quiz with you guys and ask you what are the 3 main reasons to use Git, it's a bonus, right? It's a bonus question. It's not a you're going to lose something question. But that it works towards your advantage to be here and to answer the questions and to be able to do that. So we're using Murex PHP and MySQL 2nd edition. This is a 2013 book or 2014 book, 2014 book. And that's the latest iteration of their book. They don't have a 3rd edition yet. They might come up with one. You never know. But we're talking basic PHP skills. And again, I want you to think about how PHP was made to be an embedded language, right? Embedded, which is a totally different concept than JavaScript, which is not really meant to be embedded. It's a quick scripting language, JavaScript, right? And we're going to mix PHP and JavaScript together at times. PHP for validation and server-side functionality, and JavaScript for behavior on the front end, as well as some validation on the front end. We're going to use both validation on the front end and the back end. We can't just use one, and JavaScript helps us on the front end because it does things like check things before it goes to the server, right? However, we also want to do back-end validation when we do any kind of forms because people can turn JavaScript off, in which case there'll be no validation, and you can break the server, right? So reasons to use PHP. Again, 8 out of 10 websites use PHP, which is a good reason to use it. So here's a little bit of code. We talked about embedded PHP. Here's examples of how PHP can be embedded into our code. The stuff highlighted in yellow. You can see that we can put it at the top, like I showed you. And here, as an example, we've declared 2 variables. $sign is the way we declare a variable, and we also assign variables. And it's just-in-time assignment for PHP. So when I assign it, it's like I'm assigning it for the first time. Every time we use the equal sign, okay? It's like I'm declaring it and assigning it in one. That's how you should think about it. So that's a negative and a positive. Negative-wise, you know, it's a little bit more load for the server because you keep on, you know, declaring the variable over and over again. You kind of take that space, the container that is the variable, and put some new things into it, and it has to re-infer what kind of variable you're using, right? That's the one thing it does. Okay, here, this is something new that you've never seen before. It's using the $_get. And PHP has a name for this. It's a super global variable. That's what it's called. PHP has super global variables. And the super global variable works not just like an array. Square brackets typically in C-style languages mean an array, but it also works like a dictionary, right? So I can store first name as part of our super global variable $_get. The get variable is what I want you to think of it as, right? So I can store different things there. Okay. Notice that I can do it here at the top of our code before our doc type and within our code with the echo statement. By the way, you can use both echo and print, right? You can also use brackets with echo. So you can surround, you know, kind of echo like a function and then put brackets or leave the brackets out. Both work in the same way. Right? Okay, and some examples here right from the book. Again, I think things we talked about this. PHP must have semicolons at the end of every sentence. That's not the same with other JavaScript, like JavaScript languages or JavaScript style. They don't need semicolons. You should, but it's not going to kill your code. You leave a semicolon out of PHP, it'll crash. Right? It's not forgiving that way. Right? But however, PHP ignores white space, which means you could start off a statement on one line, and 5 lines later you can put put the end of the statement. Even the semicolon 5 lines later, it's okay. As long as you have a semicolon separated statements, you're good, right? JavaScript, on the other hand, if I was going to compare the two, no. If you start doing that kind of funny stuff, JavaScript will respond in a funny way, and you'll get inconsistent effects, right? A PHP, these two statements from a syntax perspective are number one when you consider that. All right. Again, we know how to do comments. I talked about that earlier. And here's an example of how to do multi-line comments. And we've seen that before in other C-style languages. But I also want you to take a look at, again, the example code that they show here. So again, we can do multiplication, division, subtraction, all that kind of stuff as normal. All the regular operators are valid here, right? There are some differences, which we're going to talk about when it comes to conditional statements. They operate a little bit differently. And there's some things that don't quite work the same way in PHP as it does in most C-style languages. Pound is another way you can make inline comments. However, I kind of steer away from it. Not because I don't like pound as a comment style. Because I'm so used to C-style languages, I usually use a double forward slash to me, and that way I don't make any mistakes. So if I'm moving from JavaScript to PHP, and if I use pound one place and double forward slash other place, it's going to confuse me sometimes. So I kind of use one comment style throughout, right? You can make your variable names look like anything you want. However, I recommend you adopt one style, right? For example, here is discount percent and discount amount. This is okay. You're separating the two words, right, with an underscore. That's perfectly good syntax. It's fine. And because the person here is being consistent when they're coding everywhere, I'm okay with that, right? Except for subtotal, right? Although you can always look at subtotal as one word as well. So you want to be consistent. My recommendation is that you either do it this way or you go with camel case, one or the other. And the reason for this is because you don't want to flip-flop between the two. It's inconsistent coding, and then, it looks like crap. I'm just saying. So that's kind of something that you want to look at. Data types. PHP has different data types than JavaScript, and they highlight certain things. For example, JavaScript doesn't have a differentiation between an integer and a double. For JavaScript, it's just a number, right? If you're learning JavaScript, that's what you would need to know, right? Here in PHP, there is a difference. And it really depends on whether you assign an integer or some kind of decimal. There is no float. It's just double by default. And this might cause an issue again because doubles are big, right? Doubles are double precision, right? Which means they're very, very large. And when we represent them in computers, they have, and it's not unsigned, it's a signed double, right? So again, you got to consider how big that is. So a Boolean, again, you can see that that's another thing, a true or false, capital T and capital F, whole thing is capitals. String data types, and if you look at string data types, they're also arrays in some ways, right? So those are the major or the basic 6 types. Now there's other ones. We're going to go into those later on, but those are the basic types. And again, we don't declare the type in PHP, we infer the type. Whatever you assign, it becomes, right? It's actually sometimes referred to as duck typing, right? Walks like a duck, sounds like a duck, it's a duck, right? And that's how it kind of does things, which is bad, right? Because, and by the way, it's not necessarily type inference, it's more like dynamic typing. Whatever you put into it is what it becomes. That's a lot different than I assign something and now it's strict. It's going to tell me I can't reassign, an integer to a string variable that I assigned earlier. No. It's not going to give you that kind of strict, control. It won't do that at all. So that's where we can come up with a lot of bugs. Notice that there are other data types I mentioned, like an array, which is a container, and an object, which is also another kind of container. It's a generic container of the object. Okay, and it also gives some examples of different values, right? So when we assign 21.5, it's not a float. There is no float. It's a double when it comes to PHP. And same thing with string. Notice string is a capital S and Boolean is a capital B, right? That's how it looks at it. Capital I, capital D, capital B, capital S, right? That's how it is for data types with PHP. Please know that, okay? Again, when we declare a data type or any kind of variable, we use $, and when the equals operator assigns everything and declares its value and its type right away. When we declare a constant, though, it's a little different. We use something called define, and if I want to show you what a constant looks like. So here's how we declare a variable. You've seen this lots and lots. Notice they're using the underscore style for declaration, for variable declaration. And here we define a constant. This is different. It's almost like I use a system-based definition file. I go define, and then I kind of indicate the name of the variable, max underscore quantity, right? And then the value 100, and then that can never change. Now I want you to kind of understand one thing. As a convention, you need to make everything uppercase in PHP for constants, but it's not required. If you really want to make lowercase elements as constant, you can. And here's some really good examples of constants. Maximum quantity, if that was the maximum quantity, pi, 3.14159.265, and so on, right? Those things could be, considered constants, right? We want to use constants as much as possible when it comes to things we want to control. You can name variables anything you want, but the one thing you can't do is you can't start a variable with a digit or 2 underscores. 2 underscores or a digit, those things are taken. That's just a rule. Same thing with JavaScript. If you try and start a variable name with a digit, it won't work. Okay? Also, the this keyword with the $sign is reserved. What does the this keyword mean? Right? It's the same as the this keyword in other languages. It's a reference to the context for the class or an object, right? And so we don't use the this keyword at all. When it comes to object-oriented programming, I want to point out that you do not use the dot operator. You use the dash greater than sign, the arrow function. It looks very similar to C++. Ever do C++? Anyone? Ever program in C++? Ever do the dash, the kind of the arrow? The arrow indicates like the dot in other languages, right? It's almost like a pointer, which is really what it is. It's a pointer to the next property, to the next property, and you can chain a bunch of pointers together. PHP does the same thing. When it comes to looking at object-oriented stuff, which we're going to get into later on, it uses the arrow function for that. So different syntax than you're used to. Now, the one good thing about this, and is what I want to talk about before we get into this kind of stuff, is it's C influence, which means most of the time you'll know what to do intuitively. You'll know how to do a for loop. I did a for loop, and it kind of wasn't working because of my editor, but finally ended up working. There was just some minor syntax errors, right? If you know how to do a while loop, you know how to do a while loop. If you know how to do an if statement, chances are you know how to do an if statement. Now, where it becomes hairy is when you start comparing strings, right? String comparison in JavaScript and in PHP and in Java and in C# and in C++, they're all different, right? So be wary about that, about string comparison. That's where you get a little bit wonky with your stuff. All right, let's take a look at this built-in. It says it's the built-in $ underscore get. Usually it's double underscore, by the way. Yes, it's an array, but I also want you to think of it, like I said, as a super global variable, right? So basically what it has is, it's like a dictionary. It creates key value pairs, right, when the data is passed into a request. Now there's two. There's post and there's get. When would I use get? And what's the difference between get and post? Is there a difference when it comes to, in your mind? Yeah.
I believe one of them, it appears in the browser, and post it doesn't.
You're thinking about HTML. When you do a post, yeah, the action method is post or get, yeah, right? Yes. What else? Good. Okay, so I do a get request, right? It's getting something from the server. If I do post, I want the server to process something on the end. Typically, that's how it's done. That's how I want you to use it anyway. Unfortunately, it doesn't mean that, right? In PHP, because it's a super global variable, you can almost use it in the exact same way. And let me give you an example of that from a code perspective. So here's a form, and you see that we're using the get method, right? And we have name is equal to first name, and our name is equal to last name. So these things here, inputs, different input types. Well, guess what? When I use the get, because we're using a get method, like you said, right? We use the get super global variable, the $underscore get, which stores first name and last name, and their values. That's all it does. Okay? So you might think that the right thing to say is get means I'm getting information and post means I'm pushing information. But actually, no, depending on the method of the form, that's when you use it. And you have to match up the method with the form with the super global variable that is the same name. So when you do method is post, and like you said, again, it doesn't show the URL in the path. You need to use the $_post methodology, right? Yes.
So when specifically would we use get and when post?
Get is when you want to memorize the URL, right? When you want it to get, and you want to post the URL so someone can get back to that URL, right? And something that they want to generate, something they want to go back to on the server. Post is more secure, doesn't show the URL, and saves the data. Example of this would be, if I want to, especially if you want to forget also, we want to carry forward information, push it forward into the processor somehow. We want to move information from one form to the other, get. Post, we want to do it, but we want to do it in a secure way, right? It's more secure, but there's limitations with post in terms of the way you can't bookmark it. There's nothing to bookmark. It just goes to the same site, right? And that's a problem when it comes to bookmarking. Correct, right? Because it doesn't show anything on the URL. It just goes to Facebook. You can't bookmark that site or whatever. It's more secure, but there's disadvantages around it. And actually, there's a section in the PowerPoints that tell you what to use more and how to use get and post. That's the last thing I said. So when do you use get and when do you use post? So again, get, when the request is for a page that gets data from the database server. That's what they say that you should use it for. And when the request can be executed multiple times without causing any problems. So it's also, who cares if it's secure or not? That's another reason, right? Third reason. And post is for a page that writes data to a database server. You should use posts, theoretically, right? And when executing the request multiple times may cause problems or security concerns, all right? For the most part, I use post when I write things out to the server. If I want something to process, I use post, right? Typically. Yes.
So basically, something going to the server is
Post.
And it from server is get.
Should be get, but you don't have to. That's why I'm saying PHP has got loosey-goosey rules about this kind of stuff. And I'm putting it out there. This is what they say when you should, not when you have to. All right? It's not going to cause errors because it's still a dictionary. I want you to think about two super global variable arrays that are just dictionaries with key value pairs. The key would be the name of the variable that you're getting from the form, and the value is the value that you're passing into the form from the user, right? So an example of this is I have a form, and I'm entering the value of a form, right? I'm going to push it to the server because I want it to write to the server. It's going to be a post. That's the proper thing. If I'm reading from the server, so that's a create or update, right, that I'm doing. If I'm reading from the server, right, and I'm filling in a form, right, from the server information, I should use a get. That's what I should use. That is the proper method, right? You're going to see that that's not necessarily the case, right? Just putting it out there. I want to leave you with this stuff. I want to talk about just data today because that was the topic of the day. And the reason for this is because it's a little finicky. And that's why I didn't want to give you your assignment today. If I give you your assignment today, it would have taken half an hour of my time to talk about this. And we haven't talked about setup, and there's some configuration still hanging around. People have configuration issues. So I'm pushing assignment number 1 till next week. It's going to be simple, okay? We're not talking about major stuff going on with assignment number 1. It's going to be a simple assignment to get your feet wet with PHP, and you're going to have to prove that it works. And this is the challenge with PHP and assignment number 1. It's got to be live, right? It's got to be live, which means you got to find a host where you're going to host it, whether it's Azure, DreamHost, or somewhere else. And that's why I wanted to give you that extra week. Please find a host for hosting your sites for PHP, right? Because if you don't, then what's going to end up happening is you can't give me a live link and you'll lose 2 marks or 4 marks off the top, right? That's not good. Because we're web here, right? So we need to host things live. I'm going to host everything on Azure, okay, going forward. You're going to see that because I have access to Azure. So for you, you have to choose a host, yes.
For Azure, is it simple to just upload files once you have it already?
I wouldn't do it that way. That's old style, right? You're thinking about, things like using some kind of FTP protocol, right? Yeah. No. I would do a Git, kind of continuous deployment. So from Git, it's going to go right to Azure. Every time Git changes, Azure updates. That's what I wanted to do. right? And that's why my recommendation is far better and more modern.
Does Azure
Right.
have something built in?
Yes. It has a continuous source, like source deployment option. The other one that I like to start using as much as possible, and I'm not sure if it supports it, I don't think so, is Heroku. And Heroku is a kind of a clean service that's out there, but mostly it supports Node, right? Mostly. And if I was to create a new service with Heroku, now this is just for websites, right? And if I was to create an app, let me just call it my, PHP demo app, right? Oh yeah, it's got to be all lowercase, sorry. And it has to be unique. See, that's not unique. Demo app 3000. Right, there you go. And it's got to be United States or Europe. You have to choose a place, right? And if I create my app, right? One of the things is you have deployment options. You can choose GitHub, right? So continuous deployment right from GitHub with this. The challenge is, can it run PHP, right? And I know in the past that it does Node really well. Like if you're a Node server, no problem. It does Ruby, but I'm not sure if it does PHP. And I have to kind of question whether it does or not. It's been a while since I used the service for anything else other than Node, right? And I use it for one of my other classes. So if I go, if I say something like Heroku support for PHP, then it'll tell you what it does. And if it says yes, then we're good to go. That's good. If it supports PHP runtimes, it's awesome, right? And it says it supports PHP 7.1, which is awesome. That means that's another option for you guys, Heroku. Heroku is a free service that you can hook up to, and you can use Git and continuous deployment to deploy to Heroku. That's a great option, right? And it's always available for you. It's not something like DreamHost, whatever you're going to use, or even as difficult as Azure to sign up for, right? And the great thing is you can still hook up with some other service, like some kind of MySQL service with this. And the way that works is, if I go back to Heroku, right, as an example, and I want to hook my PHP demo app, I want to deploy it or access, kind of give it additional configuration settings, right? I can add resources to it, right? So not just like I can find more add-ons to add on. And Heroku has a bunch of add-ons like MongoLab or MLab. That's what it used to be called. And one thing I'm curious is if it has like a MySQL server. And if it does, which it does right here, and I'm not sure if it's going to be free. I think this costs money, right? Then you could use that as well. You don't have to even use Microsoft at all. So it's something we have to explore in this course. Heroku might be a good match. Okay, guys, thank you so much. For those people who are coming with me, I'm going to B230 for configuration issues and other related headaches, okay? Otherwise, I'll see you guys next week. Expect assignment 1 next week.